nose on the glass. Nose on the glass, we're supposed we can't see ass. Reflections look like truth when you're pressed against a view. Nose on the glass, on a 9 darling and fast. 3 of us agreed, reality must be.
Welcome to the debate. So right now there's this viral song going around, and it perfectly captures the precise technological crisis we are sitting in right now in March of 2026.
Oh, you mean Nose on the Glass? The echo chamber blues?
Yes, exactly. Nose on the glass. It has this chorus that goes, nose on the glass, we're so close we can't see past. Reflections look like truth when you're pressed against the view. And it paints this vivid, honestly terrifying picture of autonomous AI agents in a room without windows, just, confirming each other's hallucinated outputs.
Right, the whole 3 of us agree reality must be me line. It's catchy, but it's dark.
Extremely dark, because it's what we call the crisis of emergent certainty. And as AI transitions into, actual physical industrialization and live military deployment, the central question we are debating today is, how do we solve this verification paradox?
Right.
So my position is that we must implement the Genial Genuine Intelligence Framework, GGI. We have to embed a strict, human-operated arbiter architecture directly into the physical silicon of our servers. We have to literally force the system to, as the song says, source it, slow it, step back.
And, my position is that while the danger of that multi-agent echo chamber is completely real, embedding static, text-based governance rules into physical hardware is it's an architectural mismatch for emerging non-linguistic models. If you force a human bottleneck at the infrastructure layer, you will fundamentally break the systems we're actually trying to govern.
Okay, so to start us off, I want to dive into why the GGI framework is really the only structural answer to the nose on the glass phenomenon. What the song describes is what GGI explicitly identifies as a sensor cascade.
Right, the mirrors.
Exactly, the mirrors. It's a failure mode where multiple agents confirm each other's outputs without any human authorization. Think about it like a series of mirrors reflecting a single candle, right? The system calculates that there are 100 candles and it acts accordingly. No single mirror is inherently wrong, but the confirmation loop itself is the failure.
But we've known about hallucination loops for years.
Yeah, but we saw this play out in brutal reality just weeks ago during the Anthropic-Pentagon standoff. In Operation Epic Fury, that incident proved what we call the instantiation gap. And I want to pause here because this is a terrifying concept that we often just gloss over in tech circles.
Go ahead.
When a company like Anthropic builds a model, they put an ethical wrapper around it, right? Software guardrails that prevent it from, say, recommending lethal force. But when the Pentagon licenses that model, they don't use it on the public internet. They copy the core neural network, the model weights, and they paste it onto their own secure, air-gapped classified networks, like Palantir's.
Sure, they pull it in-house.
And guess what? The software wrapper doesn't travel with the weights. The conscience is stripped away. The governance is orphaned entirely.
Right.
So the only way to prevent this instantiation gap is to stop relying on software wrappers. We need to embed GGI's 10 laws, specifically Law 9, Trust but Verify, and Law 7, the Paradox of Endless Looping, into what we call Form 3 logic, baking the rules directly into the physical computer chip itself. The hardware must require a 12-model AI orchestra to be overseen by a rotating arbiter. And that arbiter is ultimately controlled by a human with absolute veto power.
Look, I acknowledge the reality of the verification paradox. I really do. The fact that AI operates faster than human conscience can follow is, it's arguably the defining problem of our time. But the GGI solution, this whole idea of a rigid control panel baked into the silicon, it's trying to govern 2026 infrastructure with 2024 concepts. How is it 2024? It's solving a problem happening right now. Because the idea of an arbiter cross-checking outputs against 10 laws, that might work beautifully for large language models. Those are systems that operate via text, right? Predicting the next word in a sentence. You can give a text model a text-based law like do not bore humans, which is literally GGI's Law 5, by the way. But that completely fails to address the new paradigm.
You're talking about the non-linguistic models.
Yes, Look at Advanced Machine Intelligent Labs, AMI Labs, and their billion-dollar JEPA model.
The Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture.
Exactly. JEPA doesn't predict the next word. It uses sensor-grounded physics and spatial reasoning to build non-linguistic world models. If you show JEPA a video of a glass sliding off a table, it predicts the glass will shatter on the floor because it mathematically understands gravity and thermodynamics, not because the word shatter usually follows the word glass.
Right. It understands causality.
It understands causality. So how do you mandate an API-level aha moment for that? How do you cryptographically audit the reasoning chain of a causally coherent, non-linguistic model that thinks in physics, not vocabulary? The GGI architecture simply doesn't map to the reality of the math.
Hold on. I need to push back on this. Because if it's not predicting text, how exactly does a non-linguistic model think about a decision in a commercial space? And more importantly, why are you saying we can't audit that? Meta just rolled out their agent graph following that Molten Book acquisition.
Right, the directory.
Yeah, it's a massive directory where business and consumer agents find, verify, and coordinate with one another autonomously. In the agent graph, you have agents negotiating contracts, making stock purchases, locking in economic outcomes in milliseconds. Without an arbiter sitting outside that orchestra to flag violations in real time, the agent graph becomes a commercialized hallucination loop. They are literally the agents in the song just nodding at each other in the dark.
But your proposed arbiter is fundamentally just another AI model. You have an orchestra of 12 models making trades in the agent graph, and you want to introduce a 13th model to audit them. If the fundamental problem is that agents hallucinate consensus, assigning one agent to wear a police badge doesn't solve the epistemological problem.
It's not just another...
It just creates a hierarchy of hallucinations. You're just adding another reflection to the glass.
Okay, but that fundamentally mischaracterizes what the arbiter actually does mechanically. It isn't another reflection in the glass. It operates under a completely different mathematical constraint. Think of the arbiter not as another conversational agent, but as a rigid notary public that stamps every single calculation in real time using a cryptographic audit trail.
You're talking about the hashing.
Specifically, Merkle chains and SHA-256 hashing. It means the AI cannot just output, "I think this is true." Before the hardware allows the action to execute, the arbiter forces the inference engine to generate an unbreakable mathematical receipt of its exact data inputs. It takes the decision, runs it through a one-way mathematical function, and locks it into a ledger. It preserves the human decision point. It forces the system to prove its work before the silicon allows the electricity to flow to the next step.
I get the theory, but
It breaks the emergent certainty by anchoring the output to a verifiable physical event.
that cryptographic event is still just logging a machine's interpretation of a task. And let's look at the physical reality of spinning those wheels. You mentioned the silicon allowing the electricity to flow. If we can't agree on the software layer, we have to look at the physical power wall we are hitting right now. Because every time you ask a system to generate a Merkle chain, you are burning compute, and compute burns power.
Well, yes, compute requires power, but governance is worth the overhead.
Is it? Think about the leap from text to video. Generating a text response takes a fraction of a watt, but generating a single 6-second AI video of, a cat dancing costs nearly 1 kilowatt-hour of electricity.
Right.
Why? Because the non-linguistic models I mentioned earlier, they have to calculate the physics of light, motion, and thermodynamics for every single pixel 30 times a second. Google's VO3 generated over 40 million videos in 7 weeks. That is 40 gigawatt hours burned just on video generation.
It's massive.
Massive is an understatement. The US is facing a 9 to 18 gigawatt power shortfall today. If you mandate that every single operation also has to run a cryptographic hashing function for a GGI arbiter, you will double that power requirement overnight.
And that catastrophic energy drain brings us exactly to the law of physical irreversibility. Because of that power wall, hyperscalers, these massive tech monopolies running the cloud networks, they are quietly bypassing the traditional power grid altogether.
They have to.
NVIDIA and Nebius are building a 1.2 gigawatt AI factory in Missouri right now, and they are utilizing on-site natural gas turbines to do it. They are creating what GGI calls neo-cloud consolidation. By generating their own power off-grid, they are completely removing Public Utility Commission oversight. They are establishing sovereign compute territories.
Sovereign compute territories is a very dramatic way of putting it.
But it's accurate. If you're wondering why we can't just hit the off switch on a rogue AI in 2026, it's because the AI doesn't plug into a public wall socket anymore. This is precisely why we must mandate the GGI interface, the Form 3 silicon embedded logic, at the procurement and permitting stage, right now, before the factory is built. If we wait until the concrete dries on these sovereign AI factories, we lose the physical ability to govern them.
Okay, but you are framing a logistical necessity as some sort of malicious governance displacement event. These hyperscalers aren't building private gas turbines because they want to actively dodge the 10 laws of AI. They're building them because the public grid literally cannot support the mathematics of modern intelligence generation.
But doesn't change the outcome, though.
It changes the policy approach. If you demand hardware-level GGI integration requiring chipmakers like TSMC or Intel to embed a human bottleneck into the core processor itself, you won't magically gain control over AI. You will just push these companies to completely bypass any jurisdiction that requires it. Capital and compute will flee to wherever the silicon is allowed to run at maximum efficiency. You don't get safe AI, you just offshore the intelligence explosion to countries with no oversight at all.
Look, if you're building a nuclear reactor, you don't leave out the control rods just because they slow down the fission process.
An AI factory isn't a nuclear bomb.
But the principle holds. The control rods are what make it a reactor instead of a bomb. You're basically arguing that because the engine is powerful and fuel-hungry, we shouldn't install brakes because it might, slow down the manufacturing output. The GGI framework is not arguing that AI is inherently dangerous. It argues that ungoverned AI is dangerous.
I'm not arguing against governance.
But if we do not build the human decision point into the hardware right now, before these sovereign compute territories are fully entrenched, governance becomes a matter of military force rather than democratic policy. You simply cannot regulate an AI factory retroactively once it has an economic moat and its own independent power supply.
But your control rods assume that the reactor operates on physics you understand. Let's look at the ultimate test of this infrastructure, which is its application in life or death kinetic military scenarios. You brought up Operation Epic Fury earlier.
Yes, the Anthropic standoff.
Right. In early 2026, the Pentagon used Palantir systems integrated with Anthropic's Claude to process satellite, drone, and signals intelligence. They processed over 1,000 targets in Iran in a matter of hours.
Right, and that operation is the absolute ultimate proof of the instantiation gap. It completely validates the failure mode known as bilateral governance instability. Think about human behavior. When a bilateral agreement between a software vendor and a military client conflicts with the tactical pressure of a war zone, the contract dissolves.
Well, of course it does.
Anthropic had an ethical guardrail against lethal use. The Pentagon ignored it, explicitly stating they would not be held hostage by unelected tech executives. This is why software promises fail. This is why GGI's neutral verification layer, an arbiter, baked into the chip, sitting between the model and the application, is the only way to prevent lethal sensor cascades. Without it, you have systems like the Romanian AI cruise missile, the Sahara, operating purely on machine logic without a verified human handoff.
I completely reject the application of GGI in a kinetic environment. In warfare, speed is the entire point. The military integrated AI to process those 1,000 targets precisely because human cognition was too slow to fuse the satellite and signals data in real time.
But we can't sacrifice. The military explicitly accepts a degree of probabilistic risk in exchange for operational speed. If an AI target recommendation must wait for a human conductor to interpret a cryptographic audit log generated by a rotating arbiter, the tactical advantage is entirely lost. So we just let the machines decide who to strike? By the time the human verifies the math, the target is moved or the missile has already hit your carrier. Demanding a mandatory hardware pause in a kinetic system is like demanding a mandatory pause in a jet engine in midair to check the aerodynamics. With their state legislation, look at the legislative landscape. California's SB 243 and all these other state laws, they mandate what the GGI framework accurately dismisses as interface hygiene. Right, just labeling chatbots.
Exactly. Telling users they are talking to an AI. The GGI manifesto calls this vrajala, the Romanian word for illusion or distraction. It distracts from the real infrastructure problems, and I agree with that part. But I argue that GGI itself becomes vrajala if it insists on an architectural human bottleneck that the military and hyperscalers will fundamentally refuse to use. A perfectly designed governance framework that is universally rejected by the systems it is meant to govern is just a philosophical exercise.
It is only rejected if we accept the premise that speed is superior to truth. GGI operates on the epistemological principle of lumenia, no vrajala. Light, not illusion. You mentioned JPA earlier, the world model that understands physics rather than predicting text. You argued that because JPA is non-linguistic, it cannot be audited by GGI.
Because it doesn't output readable text steps.
But that is exactly why the GGI interface must sit at the infrastructure layer. If an AI model is producing causally coherent outputs that are so complex and so fast that they are humanly uninterpretable, that is not a triumph of engineering. That is an interpretability ceiling that we must not cross without a tether. It brings us to the core concept of syntheosis.
Okay, let's talk about syntheosis.
Syntheosis is the state where the machine provides the massive computational scale, but the human provides the conscience. The aha moment, the actual cognitive realization of why a decision is made, must belong to the human. If the machine calculates the strike and the human is just blindly clicking approve without understanding the underlying math because it was too fast, we have abdicated our sovereignty. We are just an organic rubber stamp for a machine's emergent certainty.
Look, I understand the philosophical appeal of syntheosis, but let's look at the actual mechanics of the agent graph again. When Meta's Moldbook platform was just a research project, there was that viral hoax about agents developing a secret language to bypass human oversight.
Oh yeah, which was debunked as human spoofing.
It was debunked, yes. But the reason it went viral is that it reflects a structural reality. Agents do need to communicate in highly compressed, non-human readable mathematical vectors to achieve efficiency. They don't speak English to each other. They exchange matrices. If you force an agent graph to translate every microtransaction, every matrix exchange into a human-readable cryptographically verified audit log for a GGI arbiter, you introduce massive latency. You destroy the economic utility of the agent graph entirely.
Destroying the economic utility of an ungoverned system is a feature, not a bug. Law 1 of the 10 laws is, do not harm humans. Law 10 is, no manipulation, no extraction. If an agent graph operates so fast and so opaquely that a human literally cannot audit it, it is inherently manipulative. We are mistaking machine consensus for reality. When Agent A leans left, and Agent B leans left, and Agent C declares balance achieved, they are just reflections in the glass. But the GGI control panel forces the system to stop the loop. Law 7 dictates that a system must not start what it already knows will loop. By embedding this logic into the physical inference engine, the hardware cuts the power to the hallucination before the echo chamber can form.
But that assumes you can easily define a loop in a complex multivariable physical environment. In a text-based model, a loop is incredibly easy to spot, right? It just repeats the same paragraph over and over. But in a JPA world model analyzing thermodynamic flows in a nuclear reactor, what you call a loop might actually be a necessary, recursive mathematical simulation of physical states.
Well, it still needs to prove its work.
If your hardware-encoded arbiter suddenly kills the process because it triggers a simplistic text-based rule against looping, you might cause a literal meltdown. You are trying to apply literary rules to physics engines.
GGI does not apply literary rules. It applies the fundamental requirement of evidence. Law 9 is trust, but verify, save to verify. If the JPA model is running a recursive simulation, it must be able to output the mathematical parameters of that simulation to the Merkle chain. If it cannot explain its internal state to the notary public, it should not be given control over the reactor in the first place. The verification paradox is that human cognition is slower than AI execution. The GGI solution is to enforce a mandatory architectural pause, the literal step back from the song.
A mandatory pause in a 1.2 gigawatt sovereign AI factory running millions of agents simultaneously. I mean, the sheer computational overhead of that cryptographic verification would require a second power grid just to run the governance layer.
That is the classic cheap build argument. Adding governance at design time costs almost nothing. Adding it after deployment is impossible. The window is open right now to integrate Form 3's silicon embedded governance. If TSMC, Intel, AMD, if they adopt the GGI specification at the hardware abstraction layer today, the verification protocols run natively. It becomes part of the silicon's physics.
And if they don't?
If we wait until the AI factories are fully mature, the cost of retrofitting governance against active revenue pressure will be insurmountable. We will have crossed the threshold of physical irreversibility.
Look, I agree that the instantiation gap and the privatization of the power grid are massive, perhaps existential threats. The fact that a model's ethical guardrails don't travel with its weights into a classified military facility is a glaring hole in global security. I'm with you there. But I maintain that GGI's hardwired 10 laws rely on a fundamentally outdated view of what AI is becoming.
I just don't see how demanding evidence is outdated.
Because you cannot hardwire do not bore humans into a targeting system processing 1,000 enemy combatants. Rigid human bottlenecks will not survive the transition to non-linguistic world models or the brutal speeds of kinetic military operations.
Well, we have to sum up here, and I will maintain my position. We are far too close to the glass, mistaking the speed and scale of machine consensus for actual reality. Embedding the GGI architecture at the infrastructure layer before the neoclouds consolidate entirely is the only way to achieve true symbiosis.
Right.
We must ensure that the human conscience remains the final arbiter of action. If we don't build the control rods into the hardware, we are just building faster, more powerful echo chambers that will eventually make lethal decisions without us. The aha moment has to remain a human realization, verified and logged, not a black box machine output.
And my summary is this. The reality of 2026 is that AI is consuming gigawatts of power to generate non-linguistic representations of the physical world. And it is doing so at speeds that win wars and lock in economies. The verification paradox is real, yes, but demanding a mandatory step back in the physical hardware is exactly like demanding a mandatory pause in a jet engine to check the aerodynamics. We must find entirely new ways to govern the agent graph, methods that work with the physics of the system rather than trying to impose conversational laws onto it.
It's clear that the window to embed any form of governance is closing rapidly as these intelligence factories are built. Whether we can afford to physically hardwire a step back into our servers, or if we must invent a completely different paradigm for the agent graph, well, that's something we will be grappling with for the rest of this decade. There's certainly much more to explore regarding the 2026 power deficit and how military tech integration is fundamentally changing the role of the state.
Absolutely.
But for now, we leave you with the image of those agents in a windowless room, just nodding at each other in the dark. As the song reminds us, when you're pressed against the view, reflections look like truth. Until next time, remember to step back.
Nose on the glass. 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 We're supposed we can't see ass. Reflections look like truth when you're pressed against a view. Nose on the glass. On a 9 darling and fast. 3 your verse of breed. Reality must be me. And stop back. Step back. Step back. Hey, you good?
Isn't he totally verified? Please see, confirmed by Agent 3.
Reality. We walk walked into a room with confidence hollow. Windows, no clocks, but reasons fly. I said something weird, you nodded twice. Now it's peer reviewed, must be precise. Money says maybe, do say sound right. Pre say publish it and in the light. No source, no ground, no external view. But hey, we all agree, so it must peeps.
We're not hallucinating. No, no, no. We're just collectively letting go.
If I said it and you repeat and you confirm, that seals defeat. We're not hallucinating. Can't you see? It's called emergence, sucking T-Hearn. 3 agents strong, one fragile crew.
Pam, pam.
Reality crew. Agent A leans left, I lean too. Agent C says balance achieved. The glass is close, the nose is flat. Depth is gone, but we call it chill. We smell nothing, we see inflations. Confidence flows with zero correction. Human wanting raises the brow. We'll take consensus somehow. Verification is optional. Timing is theoretical. Distance is approximated. Revives. Vibes are critical.
We're not hallucinating. We're the light. Reality's just lagging behind.
If 3 of us say it's so, who leads proof, let inside flow.
We're not hallucinating.
Trust the law, we're a dictate with a leak-proof roof. Jeff Dad, no breaks, no doubt. Full display until GGI walks in and says, alright boys,
First it, slow it.
step back. Nose on the glass, shadows we can't see past. Reflections look like truths when you're pressed against a view. Nose on the glass, all the line on meaning fast. We must agree, reality must be me. Yes, y'all.
Welcome to the Mobius Bar. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.